On a harsh, cold evening with southern rain cutting through the air, a young girl around 10 years old, her small body shaking violently, her skin pale and marked with bruises that told stories of pain, raced through the darkened neighborhood streets. She was running from her stepfather's cruelty, drowning in complete hopelessness. But even in life's darkest moments, destiny sometimes leaves a glimmer of hope. She found herself at the right doorstep, the home of a woman whose heart overflowed with compassion. Ella May didn't question where the child had come from or demand explanations. She simply welcomed her with open arms, brought her inside, offered food, wrapped her in the gentle warmth of caring, and quietly contacted the proper authorities to shield her from the dangers that waited outside. Time moved forward, and that small girl, carrying emotional scars far deeper than the physical marks on her body, matured into adulthood. Eventually, she donned the black robes of a federal judge. Dignified and powerful, on one perfect day, she returned to that familiar house, her heart full of appreciation, just to ask the woman who had rescued her, "Would it be okay if I called you Mama?" Before we continue with this incredible story, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. It happened on a rainy Friday night in late October when everything shifted, the type of rainfall that doesn't crash down but murmurs softly. A constant, gentle mist that made the broken sidewalks slippery and caused the entire world to feel more intimate, more fragile. Ella May had just removed a sweet potato pie from her oven when the sound reached her ears, a gentle, uncertain tapping at her door. She cleaned her hands with her apron, pulse quickening slightly. At her stage in life, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. Nevertheless, she approached the door without hesitation, carrying only the careful alertness of someone who understood that life could turn dangerous without warning. Upon opening the door, she discovered a small girl standing there, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, skinny and slight, with rain-soaked hair and large dark eyes that appeared far too weary for someone her age. Her clothing was flimsy, sticking to her trembling body, and her footwear, if you could even call it that, consisted of nothing more than ripped canvas barely holding on to her feet. A thin stream of blood trickled from a scrape on her knee, mixing with rainwater to stain the porch red. Initially, she remained silent, simply gazing up at Ella May with an expression that conveyed more than words ever could. Then, speaking so quietly that Ella had to bend down to listen, the girl whispered, "Please, may I stay for a little while?" Ella May responded without pause. She extended her hands, weathered from years of gardening but infinitely tender, and guided the girl inside, asking no questions, making no demands, responding only with the natural reaction of a heart that had long ago chosen kindness as its default. The interior of the house carried the sense of cinnamon, butter, and the lingering comfort of old gospel music playing softly on the radio. The girl paused at the entrance, water dripping onto the worn carpet, shoulders hunched as though prepared to flee at any sudden motion. "Come here, sweetheart," Ella May said gently, leading her toward the kitchen. "Nobody's going to harm you in this house." She wrapped the girl in a worn quilt that held faint aromas of lavender and thyme, seated her at the table, and served her a bowl of hot chicken and dumplings, comfort food made from a recipe handed down from Ella May's grandmother, who had once nourished children seeking shelter from storms far worse than rain. The girl ate cautiously at first, looking up between spoonfuls as if expecting the kindness to disappear like morning fog. She jumped when Ella May moved too quickly, her body revealing the story her voice couldn't tell. Ella May noticed the bruises showing beneath the sleeves of the girl's dress, the raw scratches on her hands, the haunted expression in her eyes. She didn't press for details. She simply sat humming quietly, weaving together the fragile threads of safety, one small action at a time. After the girl finished eating, Ella May knelt beside her, moving deliberately to avoid startling her like a frightened animal. "What do they call you, honey?" she asked. The girl's lips quivered before she managed to whisper, "Layla." Ella May smiled. that deep, warm smile that heated you from within. "That's a beautiful, powerful name," she said. "You've got some real heritage with a name like that." Layla remained quiet, clutching the quilt more tightly around her small frame. "Now, Layla," Ella May continued, keeping her voice calm and steady, "you're protected here. Do you understand? Safe. But I need to contact someone to help ensure you stay protected, not to send you back where you don't want to be, but to find you a place where you're truly loved, okay?" At these words, Layla began crying silently, the kind of tears that don't shake your body but overflow from your soul. Ella May gathered her close, rocking her gently as she had done with her own children. Years before, she didn't shush her or hurry her along, she simply let her weep. Later that evening, after Layla had collapsed into exhausted sleep, curled up on the living room sofa, Ella May placed the call to child services. She insisted on no sirens, no uniforms, no commotion that might frighten the little one. She spoke with a woman named Miss Karen Brooks, who promised to come personally. When Miss Brooks arrived just after midnight, the rain had lessened to a lazy drizzle. Ella May led her to the living room where Layla slept peacefully, beneath the quilt. Miss Brooks, a black woman in her 40s with weary but compassionate eyes, took one look and visibly softened. "You did the right thing, Miss Turner," she said after examining Layla. "You did really well." Ella May simply shook her head. "Did what anybody should do," she replied. "It's not right to leave a child out in the storm." They decided Layla would remain with Ella May for several days while arrangements were made. Ella May didn't hesitate. She prepared the guest bedroom that had once belonged to her daughter, still decorated with faded posters and a small pink dresser. She even found an old teddy bear in the closet, brushing away the dust with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Over the following days, the house that had long been filled with memories made space for new ones. Layla, initially shy and cautious, began to relax under the steady warmth of Ella May's care. They cooked together, cornbread and butter beans, and Layla learned to shell peas the way Ella May's mother had taught her, patiently and carefully. Layla experienced nightmares, awakening, crying in the darkness. Each time, Ella May was there, murmuring soft prayers, and holding her close until the fear subsided. When the time arrived for Layla to move to a foster home, she packed her few belongings without protest, but the way her small hand clung to Ella May's as they stood on the porch said everything. "Will I see you again?" she asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. Ella May bent down, cupped the girl's face in her hands, and kissed her forehead. "You will, baby. You come knock on this door, whenever you need to. It'll always open for you." Layla nodded, stepping into the waiting vehicle. She pressed her face against the glass, watching as Ella May waved, her figure becoming smaller and smaller as the car drove away. And just like that, the house became quiet once more. But this quiet was different. It was filled with hope, filled with the sacred echo of a promise made under the gentle Alabama rain. The years passed peacefully, like the slow changing of seasons on an old porch calendar. Ella May's days found their pattern again, filled with the familiar sounds of gospel music crackling on the radio, the bubbling of collard greens on the stove, and the steady, comforting creak of her rocking chair as she transformed old quilts into new designs. Yet every evening, as the sun sank low behind the magnolia trees, her eyes would drift toward the front door, lingering just a moment longer than needed, as if expecting a knock that never came. Meanwhile, far from Linden Avenue, Layla's path was challenging. The foster home was secure by most standards, clean bedding, regular meals, but it lacked the fierce tenderness she had experienced in Ella May's kitchen. The other children in the home were loud and aggressive, each carrying their own heavy burdens. In their chaos, Layla's quietness was often mistaken for arrogance or defiance. School offered little comfort. She moved through classrooms like a shadow, her voice barely audible, her presence hardly noticed, except when it became a target for bullying. But Layla was familiar with survival. She carried Ella May's words deep inside her like a precious keepsake. You are safe. You are seen. You are somebody. She repeated them in her mind each night before sleep, and every morning before facing the world again. It was during middle school that she found sanctuary. Books, in the thick silence of the school library, among dusty shelves and forgotten tales. Layla discovered her voice. She devoured everything available, from Maya Angelou to Langston Hughes, losing herself in the poetry of survival and victory. She wrote essays that captured the attention of caring teachers, and, for the first time, she began to believe that perhaps her life could become more than the bruises and emptiness she came from. In high school, Layla flourished with a quiet determination. That surprised everyone except herself. She participated in student government, volunteered at the local food bank, and worked part-time at a downtown bookstore, organizing novels and memorizing their titles like old companions. Though she kept her circle small, she was dependable, steady, a bright thread weaving through the fabric of a town that rarely noticed kids like her. Every scholarship application she completed carried Ella Mae's memory between the lines. She wrote about second chances, about the strength found in an open door and a warm meal, about how one act of kindness could shift the balance between despair and hope. When the acceptance letter from Howard University arrived, Layla sat on her narrow bed, the envelope shaking in her hands, and allowed herself the luxury of tears, not from sadness but from gratitude. She pushed through college with the same determination that had carried her through everything else. Majoring in social work, she devoted herself to understanding the system that had both rescued and failed her. Committed to being the kind of hand that reaches back for the next struggling child, she interned at youth shelters in D.C., led literacy programs in low-income communities, and spoke at events where she shared her story not for pity, but for power. Throughout it all, she wrote letters to Ella Mae, though she never mailed them. She didn't know if Ella Mae still lived at the end of Linden Avenue, if time had claimed her, or if the house had become silent and empty. But in her heart, the image of that kitchen, that quilt, that steady voice remained a lighthouse through every storm. After graduation, Layla returned to Alabama, to Birmingham this time, where she worked for a nonprofit that advocated for children's rights. She navigated courtrooms and case files with the same quiet fierceness Ella Mae had once used to wrap a trembling girl in safety. Years slipped away. Her hair grew longer, her steps more confident. She became a woman of importance, respected, not for the volume of her voice, but for the depth of her beliefs. And yet something remained incomplete, a thread left unknotted in the tapestry of her life. It was on a spring morning, heavy with the fragrance of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass, that Layla finally found herself driving down the old familiar roads toward Montgomery. She had turned 30 the month before, a milestone she never thought she'd reach, and there was only one person she wanted to celebrate it with. Linden Avenue appeared smaller than she remembered, the trees taller, their branches forming cathedral arches over the cracked street. Some houses had been renovated, painted bright and fresh. Others sagged into their foundations, tired but still standing. At the very end, unchanged except for the thickening ivy around the fence, stood Ella Mae's house. Layla parked her car by the curb, hand suddenly trembling on the steering wheel. She stared at the porch where she had once stood, drenched to the bone, holding nothing but fear. The steps still groaned as she climbed them. The same faded welcome mat lay askew in front of the door. She raised her hand to knock, but froze. Heart pounding. What if Ella Mae wasn't there? What if she didn't remember? What if time had stolen even this? Before doubt could root her feet to the porch, the door opened. Standing there, a little more bent, her silver hair pulled back in a bun, was Ella Mae. For a long moment neither spoke. Ella Mae's keen eyes, still bright despite the years, examined Layla's face, searching past the professional clothes and adult appearance to find the girl she had once sheltered from the rain. Recognition bloomed slowly, like the opening of a flower, and then Ella Mae's face softened into a smile so wide it could have illuminated the entire street. "Well, look what the good Lord brought back to me," she said, voice cracking slightly. Layla choked back a sob and took a shaky step forward. "Miss Ella May, it's me. It's Layla." Ella May reached out and pulled her into an embrace that was somehow both fierce and fragile. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered against Layla's hair. "I knew it, baby." They stood there on the porch, swaying gently in a hug that held years of separation and longing and gratitude, the soft Alabama breeze curling around them like a blessing. Inside, the house was almost exactly as Layla remembered. The same worn furniture, the same quilts draped over the couch, the same scent of cinnamon and old wood. They sat at the kitchen table, and Ella May made sweet tea. Her hands a little more arthritic, a little slower, but still steady enough to pour out love in every movement. They talked for hours, bridging the years between them with stories and laughter and more than a few tears. Layla told her about college, about her work with foster children, about how every good thing she had accomplished had grown from the seed Ella May planted that rainy night. Ella May listened, eyes shining, pride radiating from her in waves. And then, as the sun dipped low and the cicadas began their evening chorus, Layla reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers. "I came back for more than just a visit," she said, voice trembling. "Miss Ella May, if you'll have me, I'd like to make it official. I'd like to be your daughter legally." She slid the papers across the table, adoption papers neatly filled out, waiting only for Ella May's signature. The old woman's hand fluttered to her chest, and for a moment all the breath seemed to leave the room. Her eyes filled with tears that spilled free without shame. "You were mine from the moment you knocked," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. She reached for the pen with fingers trembling, not from age, but from the sheer weight of love. As she signed her name, Ella May Turner, mother, she pressed the pen so firmly the ink spread slightly, as if trying to anchor the moment into the very fabric of time itself. The next morning, under a soft gray sky still heavy with the scent of last night's rain, Layla returned to Ella May's house with a notary public, a kind older man from town who had known Ella May for decades. They sat together in the living room as he witnessed the final signatures, his pen scratching lightly across the official forms, sealing the bond between two souls who had chosen each other long before ink met paper. When it was finished, Ella May leaned back in her chair, eyes closed, breathing in deep and slow, as if trying to absorb the reality of it all. Layla knelt beside her, resting her head lightly against Ella May's knee like a child might, and for a moment neither spoke, letting the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant chirp of birdsong fill the sacred quiet between them. Over the weeks that followed, Layla settled into a routine on Linden Avenue, renting a small place just down the street so she could be close without making Ella May feel overwhelmed. Most days she came by early with groceries or fresh coffee, claiming she just wanted company, but secretly checking on the woman who had once saved her life. They planted a vegetable garden together that spring, laughing over crooked rows of okra and tomatoes, trading jokes about whose hands were dirtier by the day's end. On Saturdays, they set up a folding table at the end of the driveway and sold homemade jams and pickles to neighbors who still remembered Ella May's sweet potato pie contests at the church bazaar. Layla marveled at how effortlessly Ella May wove herself into the fabric of everyone's life without even trying. How she made people feel seen, valued, grounded. Some evenings after supper dishes were washed and put away, they sat on the porch as the sun melted into sherbet colors across the Alabama sky. Layla listened to Ella May tell stories about the old days, about picking cotton under the blazing sun as a girl, about marching for civil rights when it was dangerous just to walk down the wrong sidewalk, about raising 3 children on a cleaner's wages and a stubborn faith that tomorrow could be better. Sometimes Layla would share her own fears, the cases that broke her heart, the nights she doubted she was strong enough to keep fighting for kids who seemed lost before they even had a chance to be found. Ella May never tried to fix it, never gave easy answers. She just listened, her presence like a balm, her faith in Layla so steady it mended the broken pieces back together without either of them needing to name them. One Sunday morning, as church bells rang out across the sleepy streets, Layla found herself standing at the front of Bethel Baptist Church, a microphone trembling slightly in her hand. She hadn't planned to speak, but the pastor, knowing a little of her story, had asked if she would share a few words about gratitude, about second chances. She looked out across the small crowd, catching Ella Mae's smile beaming up at her from the second row, and felt a knot in her throat she hadn't known was there. She cleared her voice, heart hammering against her ribs. "I wasn't born into a family like many of y'all," she began, voice quivering just a little. "But one rainy night, God sent me one, not through blood, but through a door that opened when the whole world seemed closed. Miss Ella Mae Turner didn't ask me where I came from, didn't ask what trouble followed me. She just said, 'You're safe here, baby.' And because of her, I learned that love isn't about obligation. It's a choice, a decision you make every day to keep the door open, to keep setting the table for one more." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, carried by the memory of warm kitchens and whispered promises. "Today, I am who I am because a woman, who had no reason to take me in, chose to do it anyway. She chose love. And because of that love, I choose every day to fight for others who need a door opened to them." The congregation rose to their feet in a standing ovation, some dabbing at their eyes, others clapping so hard the old rafters shook. Ella Mae sat with her hands folded over her heart, tears slipping freely down her cheeks, uncaring of who saw. Afterward, Layla embraced her on the steps of the church, the two of them framed by the rising sun, and it felt to Layla like the whole world had finally come full circle. Life continued, as life does. Seasons turned, gardens grew and withered and grew again. Layla continued her work in Birmingham, eventually opening her own nonprofit dedicated to supporting foster youth aging out of the system, naming it Ella's House, in honor of the woman who first taught her what home truly meant. Ella Mae, though, growing frailer, remained a stubborn force of nature. She insisted on baking cornbread for the neighborhood kids on Saturdays, insisted on pruning the rose bushes herself, even when Layla scolded her for it. She moved slower, her voice raspier, but her spirit remained unbroken, a beacon that refused to dim. And then, on a golden afternoon in late September, with the windows thrown open to let in the scent of autumn leaves and the murmur of distant laughter from children playing down the block, Ella Mae passed away quietly in her sleep. Layla found her in her favorite armchair, a worn quilt tucked around her legs, a soft smile lingering on her face as if she had simply drifted into a sweeter dream. The funeral was held at Bethel Baptist, packed to overflowing with people whose lives she had touched in ways big and small. Neighbors, church folk, old students, young mothers, city council members, even the mayor, all came to honor the woman whose kindness had shaped a community. Layla spoke at the service, her voice breaking. Only once when she said, "She didn't just open her door that night. She opened a future. Mine. And now it's my turn to keep it open for others." As the casket was lowered into the soft earth under the shade of a sprawling oak tree, Layla laid a small hand-stitched quilt over it, the same one Ella Mae had wrapped around her shoulders all those years ago. In the years that followed, Layla carried Ella Mae's legacy like a torch through every dark place she encountered. Ella's house grew into a network of shelters across Alabama, offering not just beds and meals, but true homes for young people adrift in a world too often indifferent to their pain. And every new house had a small wooden plaque by the door, etched with the words, "You are safe. You are seen. You are somebody." It became their motto, their promise, and it echoed down every hallway, through every whispered prayer, through every life changed. Sometimes late at night, Layla would sit on her porch, the warm breeze rustling, the leaves around her, and she would close her eyes and imagine she could hear the creak of old porch boards, the laughter of neighbors drawn by the smell of baking pies, the quiet hum of a woman stitching love into every fold of her life. She would smile softly, hand resting over her heart, and whisper into the darkness, "Thank you, Mama, because family wasn't always something you were born into. Sometimes it was something you built, one open door at a time. And thanks to Ella Mae Turner, Layla knew exactly how to keep that door open, wide, and waiting for whoever needed it next.